Morning, everybody, or afternoon, I should say. We're going to get started in a little bit. We're going to let people filter in and join. Just hold tight and we'll get started. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here. We want to get a lot of time in to get through all the things that we're going to get through. So yeah, hello and welcome everybody to our webinar, Farmer Mental Health in New York State, a story of crisis and advocacy from the makers of the documentary Muckville. My name is Adam Howland. I'm the outreach director with New York FarmNet. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm really happy to be here today to be your host. We're going to have a really great discussion, and we're gonna screen a really impactful, really important film, and I think you all are really going to enjoy it and come away with a lot of information. So as you may or may not know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we at FarmNet thought it'd be a perfect time to shine a light on, like I said, a very impactful story about one farmer's journey from struggling with his own mental health to becoming a national farmer support advocate, as well as a conversation with the director who told his story. So in this webinar, we're going to be screening, like I said, the documentary Muckville, and we're going to have a conversation with director Jeff Merks, as well as the subject of the film farmer Chris Pavelski. The webinar is sponsored by New York FarmNet. We're a Cornell University program offering free confidential consultation and support for any New York State farmer 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. With us today in the background, we have Michael Robertson, who's going to be helping me out, and he's going to put our FarmNet website and 1-800 number in the chat for all of you. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. So attendees will be muted, but can ask questions in the Q&A. So we will also be taking questions from the audience at the end of the day, but at the end of the webinar, but you can put them in the Q&A at any time. So Michael's going to be monitoring that, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to get through and get to a lot of questions. We have over 100 people registered, so I'm sure we won't be able to get to everyone, but we'll get to as many questions as possible. And like I said, your video and microphones will be muted, but the video will be recorded. We're going to be posting it on our YouTube site as well as our program website, www.nyfarmnet.org. And yeah, we're really excited to be able to share this with as many people as possible. So if you know anybody who couldn't make it today, please let them know that the conversation will be recorded and posted. Just a real quick note I want to mention, this video and this discussion contains suicidal content and ideation, and some viewers may be affected. New York FarmNet's aim is to increase awareness and promote a greater understanding of mental health issues impacting the agricultural industry. But please, if you are uncomfortable, feel free to leave the webinar. And of course, anyone who is experiencing crisis, they can always call the National Suicide and Crisis Hotline, 988, emergency services at 911, or whatever your local, or avail yourself of whatever local mental health resources you have available. So that is an important point we want to make sure to leave you all with. Now, without further ado, so to speak, I'm going to introduce our guest today. Chris Pavelski is a fourth-generation onion farmer on the post-glacial black dirt or muck region of New York State in Goshen, New York. We get to know Chris through the documentary Muckville, and this movie takes us on a journey through time on the Pavelski farm, from the family's immigration from Poland in the early 20th century through the many ensuing challenges and difficulties facing the farm, which ultimately culminated in Chris's existential crisis and suicidal ideation. Again, Chris is the subject of the documentary, but you can read much more about his story by going to his blog, which is just simply www.muckville.com. Muckville was directed and photographed and edited by Jeff Mertz of Moonbow Imaging. Jeff Mertz is an award-winning independent multimedia producer with an interest in telling stories that focus on the human element of large-scale issues. Past films he's directed have screened at multiple major film festivals, and his work has been featured in numerous national and international publications. You can learn a lot more about his work at moonbowimaging.com. Jeff, Chris, thank you guys so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. It's a privilege, and I really appreciate you hosting this and doing this, Ben.
Absolutely. So, without further ado, we're going to get into the screening of the film. So, for all of our participants, I'm going to mute myself and share my screen, and we'll start things off. Just give us one moment. All right. It's I've lost track of how many times I've seen it, and it that the film always hits hard, regardless of how many times you see it. It's an amazing accomplishment, Jeff and Chris, both of you. It's a wonderful film that really shines a light on something that is really really important. Um, so now that we've screened the film, I'd like to have a little bit of a chat with both of you, and then we'll do a few other things and then get into the live Q&A. So, Jeff, I was hoping to start with you. What initially got you interested in making this film, especially on such a challenging topic that's so important, but not necessarily as well known as many other potential topics might be out there?
hmm Yeah. So I moved to the Hudson Valley in 2020 and pretty soon thereafter started doing some documentary work around agriculture in collaboration with a few nonprofits around where I am, mainly Scenic Hudson that who deals mostly with farmland preservation. So in doing that work, I encountered the issue because I did a piece on a farm where they were sort of reeling from a suicide on the farm, um, even though I was there to, document something else. And so that was my exposure to the topic. I've always been really interested in food and food production. So that's what's led me to agriculture. And I've also been, before making this, wanted to make a piece around mental health for a long time. Um, I was briefly courting the idea of making something around secondary trauma and therapists, but that didn't pan out. So when I encountered this topic, it was, I was sort of ready to make something about mental health, because I'm sort of on the other side of my mental health journey. And then once I started doing research about it, sort of realized how little there was out there about the topic of farmer suicide. There was like one or two articles from, 5, 7 years ago about, a couple of suicides in like Wisconsin or, the Midwest, but definitely nothing within the Northeast context. Um, and, there was a CDC report about that had stats in it, but then that CDC report was redacted because of statistical errors, which, yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with that report.
Mhm.
Um, and so there really wasn't, I sort of perceived that there was a gap that needed to be filled. And since, I had been sort of on the other side of, my own mental health crisis, like knew that I could sort of um, connect with whoever I found, on a very, personal level and saying that like, maybe I hadn't experienced crisis like through farming, but I sort of know what it's like to be in that position. Um, so yeah, and then I'm always interested in talking about stories that are very comprehensive and sort of locate the effects of, the large scale things that we're dealing with as a culture and a species, like climate change and the effects of capitalism and um, so many things about how our economy works, like the state of nature, like all those things come to roost on a farm. Um, and, I think the mental health crisis that's happening on a lot of farms is the result of just these like triangulating forces, which is what, the film goes into. So, um, yeah.
Amazing. I mean, it sounds like you really found something that is at the intersection of something that's meaningful and important to you personally, but also where you've identified a gap. And that's that's what's so I'm not a filmmaker, but I would imagine that that is really where you want to be when telling an important story. So,
Hmm.
um, Chris, turn it over to you. The film kind of touches on this, but I think a lot of people may not realize that, you have a background in communications. You studied at Northwestern. Can you talk a little bit more about why and how your personal story evolved into being an advocate and some of the other ways that you've been advocating for farm support, farmer mental health in general?
Well, first, I want to thank FarmNet for hosting this and all the programs you do. My wife and I availed of your services 3 times, three different kind of events and occasions, and it's very important. And I really think that the model of FarmNet should be established nationwide. To all the extension services should have it across the country. Um, I also have to correct. I taught for 3 summers at Northwestern, but I'm a Hawkeye. I went
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
My
think I
apologies.
actually undergraduate I did SUNY Cortland, and then graduate school was the University of Iowa, home
There
of
we
Kate
go.
Clark. But yeah, so my bachelor's and master's degrees are in communication studies, broadcasting and film emphasis. And when I moved back to the farm after I met Eve at Iowa in grad school, and we got married in 1990, and we were there in Wisconsin, where she was from, till 93. Then we moved back to the farm in 93. And I farmed part-time for a couple of years and started farming full-time in 96. And the first year I farmed full-time, I got hit by hail. And matter of fact, half the valley was wiped out by hail. And it was like basically a new experience to the degree of devastation. There had been hailstorms in the area, and there had been floods, including the classic flood of 1955. But something like this hadn't happened in a number of years on this scale. And I kind of was one of the few farmers in the area at the time who had any kind of college experience or any kind of educational experience on that kind of level. And so I was kind of looked towards being someone who can uh, maybe help do something, whatever. So I kind of got drafted to be both public policy advocate and also a spokesperson with the media. And I was the only person that had any kind of that kind of training or anything at all. So it was kind of baptism by fire, as it were. And after that happened in 96, we were then, I mean, it was just a series of weather events that happened. 98, we got hit by another massive hailstorm. 99 was a drought that hit the entire eastern seaboard. That's how even I got on CNN 3 times, basically. And it was just a number of different weather events. And a number of other issues came up, and I just kind of fell into it. And it turned out it's something that I actually enjoy very much doing. I love grassroots activism. I love public policy development. I'm decent at it, and I love dealing with the media. Matter of fact, I'll never forget one of the first things I dealt with was CBS News network was doing a story on changes to the housing code for farm workers. This is back in 1996, and I saw the producer. And they'd stopped off the end of my property, and they were shooting me as I was doing some farm work in the field. And this is after we were hit by the hail, and I could see the equipment. This wasn't from cable 6. I knew from the level that this was bigger. And the producer had said she'd gotten kicked off 3 different farms before she got to me. And I was like, hey, I'd love to talk to you. And
Right.
so that's how I kind of got into that role, was for that. And then it just kind of developed, and it's something I actually enjoy a great deal.
That's awesome. It's so rare to, to have both of those skill sets, your vocation of being a farmer, but also being able to really be a storyteller. I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there that don't realize how important it is for advocates to be from the community they're advocating for. So that's amazing. And really, again, impactful. Um, Jeff, I'm curious, when you were in the process of making this documentary, obviously you do a lot of research and background and things of that nature, but over the course of making the film, was there anything that surprised you?
I think the main thing, I mean, again, I've been working in agriculture for, or like around agriculture for a bit before going into it, but I think it took some time to understand kind of the in and outs of like crop insurance and
Mhm.
how that works, and sort of um, how it's really kind of not really a fair deal when it comes to compensating farmers for something that's inherently completely beyond their control. And I think I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's been some revisions to crop insurance policy since the 90s, but it's probably still not like a one for one kind of deal, I imagine. So there's still, room to go there. But yeah, just sort of all these hidden things that really stack the deck against farmers in so many ways. I mean, that's one of them. I Something more surprising that I only learned after a more recent Q&A, like after the film was made, was how farmers aren't able to unionize. That was something that came out of a Q&A that we did around Muckville recently, and that was kind of shocking to me. And like I feel like there's a whole, documentary contained in that.
Right.
Um, and then thirdly, I had never seen onions be harvested before. So that was really fun
Right.
to go out there. Um, and like when I got home was just, covered in black dust, and like I took my shoes and socks off and realized that like my legs had basically turned black. Um, so yeah, it's like some serious surprises, some fun ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I would imagine that when you're in the process of telling these stories, you not necessarily you're not an active participant, you're behind the scenes, but you get to dive into the whole world of the people you're featuring in these films. So yeah, black dirt and all, right?
Hmm.
Um, Chris, I'm curious, especially since you have this really deep well of experience, going back many years. Have you seen the conversation about mental health and farmers and agriculture changing, evolving, hopefully improving, in any way?
I think it's starting, but I think it's going to be something that's going to, there's no, and this kind of relates to some of the questions I see that are showing up in like in the chat and such. Sadly, there's no magic bullet per se, or it's not going to be a quick fix. And what I can compare it to, and we talked about this, uh, Jeff and Eve and I were interviewed by Hutsy on the radio program on Sunday. And one of the things I compared it to or talked about was when I started doing the uh, media stuff back in the 90s in response to what kind of issues we were dealing with. Again, every other farmer virtually locally was reluctant to talk to the media, and they would literally would throw the media off the property. And I was the only farmer that would do it. And not exaggeration, the only farmer. And this was for years. And I would make the point to them. I would say, listen, they have the media has a story. They have one side that they're talking to. They're going to do the story, whether you talk to them or not. The issue is whether or not then if you get your side across to get your issue or point across, and then you can hopefully it could be a fair story. And that story that in 96, which was about the changes in the Farm Worker Housing Code, ended up being a very fair story. I mean, there was things in there I didn't like, and there's things in there that I thought were excellent. And I think this is the same thing. I think that, and as our society is getting better about it, which is good because the society will help move it forward, the different parts or aspects of society and different industries and so on and so forth. And I think as we move forward and people see like, our example in this film and others, I think then that will get people to be less reluctant to be not seek the help and not talk about it and not move forward. I think that's a big part of it. And today in my area, most farmers will talk to the press.
Mhm.
It's a huge sea change from what existed here 30 some years ago. And it's sad it took 30 some, it took 20 some years before it did, but it did eventually improve. And I think that the more attention that's drawn to it, the more like this film could get exposure. And then also if we can get more policy, like again, like I'm going to be proposing to my contacts on Capitol Hill that the FarmNet model be expanded out to the entire extension system, and then we need to support not only the FarmNet, but there's a national organization, AgriSafe, as well, who does incredible work. We need more support on state and federal level for these agencies, these programs that they offer, and I think that's what's going to make a big difference.
So it sounds like, I mean, not to put words in your mouth, but you would, if you were going to make a recommendation to a farmer, you would say, it's okay to tell your story. It's helpful overall, not just to yourself, but to the agricultural, community.
And I think that's going to help with the stigma of it too. And I think one of the points I made in an interview recently, and it was highlighted in someone's comment on LinkedIn actually, in talking about the documentary was, as farmers, uh, if our crop has an infestation of insect of some sort, or has disease that's taking over, you have to do things, or you have weeds, you have different measures or actions you have to take to know to deal with that, whether it be cultivating in terms of weeds, or spray a chemical, putting a fungicide out or whatever. And we have to look at that in that same way, in which, as far as mental health and farmer mental health. And when you have that, you then have to take measures or whatever to address that, whether that be therapy or whether that be medication. I mean, there's a stigma associated with that. I've been on antidepressant for a number of years now. And I used to have shame in it. I would never tell. I had no problem telling people I was on Vasipa for my triglycerides, or what else for my heart, or I take tall shots for my psoriatic arthritis. Why am I embarrassed of the fact that I take Wellbutrin for my mental stability, or it assists me? And that shouldn't be. But it's understandable. It's been for so long, but it's something that, I feel that if, I talk about and reveal it, maybe other people can hear that, will become more comfortable, and they'll talk about it too. And they'll be more inclined. The important thing is then to look for that help, to find a therapist, to seek a professional who can give them a medication that could help.
Amazing. It's a great point. Great point. Um, so what we thought we would do is, at this point in the webinar, is we would ask our audience to participate in a couple of polls, just to sort of get a feel for their understanding of maybe what some of the problems are, or their personal experience. So we're gonna activate some polls now. Everybody, you will get a chance to answer. A window will pop up on your screen, and then I will share the results. So just give me one moment here. So there you go. There are two questions here. Do you know a farmer who has suffered or is currently suffering from some sort of mental health issue? Examples include stress, depression, anxiety, substance abuse. And question two is, in 2017, the University of Iowa did a study that found that farmers have a higher rate of suicide than people working in other occupations. What do you think that higher rate was? And we'll take a minute. And also, this is a good time to mention, remember, after we look at the results here, we're going to get into the live Q&A. So please, if you have questions for Jeff or Chris, put them in the Q&A section. It is at the toolbar down at the bottom of your screen. It just says Q&A.
I like to take it. Well, to answer the question, mention the fact that the star of this to me is my wife. My wife does an amazing job in this, and she's always been reluctant as far. My wife and I have been partners as far as the policy stuff and dealing with the media. Though the media, I had to do a lot of times a lot of arm twisting a little bit. And at first this was going to be me. And when Jeff came after doing some B-roll footage, he asked if he could talk to her, and I kind of begged her, and she agreed. But um, she did an amazing job. And again, I have to also, hats off to Jeff. I mean, the way he incorporates so people know, all the footage you see in it is family footage of my family. It's with the exception of a couple of photographs from a magazine, but even in the one picture that the people peeling the potatoes, the older woman is the uh, great grandfather Pavelski, his wife, my great grandmother, one of my great grandmothers. And it's not many people my age can say that I have on either photographs or film. One, two, three, I think four great grandparents I have. Either three of them on 8mm film, four of them in photographs and such. With I'm in the photographs with them, or like, or have the or own them. And so that incredible archival footage that Jeff masterfully wove in with the narrative that he did is just amazing. I mean, I have to admit, I've seen it a million times now, and I get choked up when watching it at times, especially the sequences of my father.
Well,
Mm.
I want to say I agree on both counts. Your wife is absolutely amazing in the film, and it also I really do love the historical aspects. It comes across, as a cool historical documentary, and then moves into the important message as well. So it's got both of those elements really wrapped up nicely.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of my desire to make something comprehensive. And I also do some history projects here and there, commission history projects, and part of what I saw as making a comprehensive story around the topic is both, sort of what current recent policy has been and climate change and all that, but also, all that's also informed by history,
Yeah.
and that family narrative, and that family narrative sort of supercharges, um, the weight of all the present stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it turned out really, really good. We love showing it at FarmNet, far and wide wherever we can, including our to all of our consultants at a recent training. So it's a great film.
Thank you.
So just just looking at the results here, it looks like most of you, not surprisingly, do know someone who has or is currently suffering from some sort of a mental health issue. And then the vast majority were correct about the 2017 University of Iowa study. It is the rate is 3.5 times. So that is farmers are 3.5 times more likely to commit suicide than people working in other occupations. So, and with that, we will get into the live Q&A. So we've got Michael in the background sending me some questions here. So just give me one moment here. So what do you, I guess this would be for both of you. What do you think we as extension educators, so this is from an extension educator in the audience, can do in our role to help, number one, change the system, and number two, support farmers? So maybe Chris, do you want to take that one first?
Well, the first thing is, you want to get where the topic can be talked about, and farmers can feel that it's something that they can open up about. And the, one of the reasons why I agreed to do this was the fact that it was the experiences my wife and I had over the years when we worked on we we secured we got a $10 million earmark for our valley back in the '02 Farm Bill, after, because we had suffered so many losses. And one of the reasons that happened was because the fact that we weren't, it wasn't an abstraction. When we talked about when we were hit by the disasters, we were wiped out. We went, and my wife hated this and hated it and still hates it. And she hated the time, big time. But I was very frank about the losses and was very specific. Like, we just lost, 150,000. We just lost 200,000, in 225,000. I am this much in debt. And my wife was like, she didn't like the fact that something that's very private to most people became, quite public. But personalizing it is entirely different than when it's just an abstraction. Like, farmers are hurt, we have to help them. No,
Mhm.
This farm has lost this amount of money and this is what's going to affect them. Then it becomes more real, it becomes more tangible. And really felt that, number one, the first thing is, is to basically, bring it to light and talk about it. That's number one. And then we have to look at, and this is something I struggle with all the time, but we have to look at ways in which, policies that can improve things, and develop those policies, formulate them, and then effectively pitch them. And I know that one of the nicest compliments my wife and I have ever gotten in the 30 some years we've been doing the policy work was years ago when my wife was serving on Senator Clinton's Ag Advisory panel. She took my wife aside after one of their Ag Advisory meetings, and she said, she said, I really admire and respect you and your husband because most people, and not just farmers, but across the board, approach us being politicians or elected officials. They'll say, I got a problem, but they can barely articulate the problem quite often, and they have no solutions. And the elected officials like, what do you want me to do about it? And whatever. And she said, you and your husband, not only do you have, solutions, you come up with legislative language and talking points to defend it, and you go to the press to, build support for it. These are the things that we really need to do. We need to not just come up with ideas or programs in which, because I'm assuming that question was talking about like on the economic level and like, we have to come up with, well, how do we address or fix it? What are the things we do to make it better? How do we address that? And then we need to actively work on making it happen. It's not going to happen on its own. It has to be something that you have to effectively work together and push. And we have to work together too, as much as possible, across commodities, across regions, and build as many bridges we can with each other to do it.
So kind of a similar, but on the flip side question for you, Chris. What do you think can be done to encourage farmers to seek support before they reach the point of crisis? There's been a lot of talk about the culture and, stigmas and things of that nature. What, in your experience, works to convince a farmer to seek help?
Well, again, it's got to be something it's got to be brought to their attention as far as what's, that the problem is being articulated and there's solutions out there, or at least the start for that. And I think that if again, if a national model existed, or for a FarmNet or and the like, and entities like FarmNet and AgriSafe and the like came up with programs where you'd go out to and visit farming communities and like bring this film, show it, and say and just have it maybe not necessarily have any solutions at that point, but have a discussion, a roundtable discussion. Say, hey, listen, this is what here's a film that's about this issue.
Right.
It's not something you should be ashamed of. And we're not going to put anybody in a spot here. If you want to talk, you can. If not, so be it. But has anyone ever dealt with this? Have you thought about this? What are ways in which you think that get people to talk about it first. That's because especially for this issue, you gotta eliminate the stigma as much as possible. And we need the best way to do that obviously is get people to talk about it. And I would encourage, FarmNet to develop some programs that can be disseminated out through the extension offices. And this is I'm talking in terms of New York, to those different communities. And obviously off season during just in the a winter meeting or something like that, and say, hey, listen, we're going to show this film, and we're going to talk about this, and
Mhm.
go from there, and then offer up private ways in which to private meetings or private discussion with someone who might be in more need in a more of an immediate way.
Absolutely. Um, I love this question, and Jeff, I'm going to throw it to you first. How do you propose we address the disconnect between people who eat food, and the people who produce the food, so that the conversation can happen around food system reform, so that things like subsidies aren't a dirty word, or replaced with real pricing that supports farmers and ranchers, And I think that's such an important question, because I do personally believe that there is this huge disconnect between consumers and what it takes for producers to get that to a table. So, from your mind, what would you say is a good way to bridge that gap?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's super real. I mean, even, living in the Hudson Valley, you go to a grocery store and try to buy celeriac, and even the cashier at a grocery store doesn't know what celeriac is. Um, so there's so much room there for education. I mean, I think the first step, and for me, on my process of getting closer and closer to the farm and seeing, food production in real time, has been joining a CSA. Like, I think that's like the best entry point to like getting people a little bit closer to the food that they're eating and who's growing it. And especially, in urban environments where people don't have the means to travel to a farm. I think that gives even if they go to like their pocket park and pick up a share from a farmer who may be based, 2, 3 hours away, but they're in the city distributing a share, that puts a face to the name and a person to, the leak or whatever it is that you're getting. Um, and like creating that human connection, um, I think goes a long way in the long run and forging that connection. Um, and then beyond that, it's tricky because it demands like a certain level of desire from the consumer to be educated,
Right.
to want to connect to how their food is grown. And so we have to inspire a sense of love
Hmm.
for food, I think, first, and then everything goes from that. Um, but yeah, I'm a huge proponent of CSAs. And so maybe then the thing is like, well, can we supply farmers with the means to maybe take CSAs to further markets than they otherwise would? Um, or, enable them to grow a little bit more so that they can do that. Um, yeah, sort of facilitating that direct consumer connection as much as possible, I think is the thing.
And I'm glad you mentioned something in there that it's a two-way street, right? It's a responsibility for everybody to want to connect with a greater level of understanding and intimacy about where their food actually comes from. So yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that it is something that it's not just on the farmers. It's consumers, it's communities, ag in the classroom, things of that nature that are all important. Chris, what about you? What do you think are some good ways to bridge that gap of understanding and empathy for the people who are producing food and the people who are consuming it?
Well, it's going to be a it's going to be difficult because the fact that we as a society, I mean, at the turn of the previous century, I think it was like between 40 to 60% of the population was involved in agriculture in the United States, and now we're down to 1 to 2%. And so that, I mean, that just that being not that indirectness of it leads to a number of problems. I think that we need to educate people more as far as what is involved with it because they really don't have an understanding. I know that after 2019 when we were really hurt uh by some dumping that was happening and COVID towards the end and stuff 2019 to 2020, I had an op-ed that ran in the Albany Times Union. It was called Unsustainable Disparities, and I pointed out in the op-ed that I listed all the various entities that make money when I would sell my onions at the time, and all the chemical company, seed company, all those entities I listed. And I said, and quite often the only person that doesn't make anything is me. I mean, there's years, that everyone got paid something out of what I did, and I was the only one, and that's just not sustainable as a model. And things are moving more and more towards consolidation and our food production in the hands of relatively smaller and smaller, number wise, but large operations entities. And my thing is that has not been good for this country in terms of our energy production or energy policy, and it's led in some cases to some disastrous results in terms of foreign policy as a result. When we start running out of food, wait until
Hmm.
when that happens. So I think that's one important thing that we really have to get people to understand. And then I always also think about the time when I testified before the Senate Ag Committee, and you see the snippet of it that Jeff included in the documentary. There was a part of it where one of the that it was 3 panels that day, and the first panel was the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, Tom Vilsack, who's again, that was during the Obama administration. And then there was a head of the two main farm organizations, and then there was four farmers who were chosen by the committee members, and I was Senator Gillibrand's choice. And Vilsack, when he testified, he had this idea of creating 100,000 new farmers, like President Clinton created 100,000 new cops. And my wife and I audibly laughed out loud. She was sitting next to me for the testimony, and it's not it's just kind of a harebrained idea. And the point I made was when because we were asked what we thought about the proposal during our panel part. And my response was, instead of trying to come up with a scheme in which to create more farmers, and we should have some programs to do that, but how about make farming more profitable for those that are in it? And then their
Right.
children will naturally go into it. And then
Yeah.
when I say profitable, I'm not saying I want to be Elmer J. Fudd millionaire and own a mansion and a yacht. And
Right.
my professor, by the way, was very happy that I was able to quote, work a Bugs Bunny quote into the congressional record. But, but, I just want to make a living. And
Right.
we really need, and I said how basically what's happening now is, all these, they were listing programs like CSAs, and they're good. And Jeff's exactly right. That's a way in which to bridge people to food production, get them to understand better. It's a great way. But they're talking about urban agriculture, rooftop agriculture, this, that. And like, my thing was that's shuffling the deck chairs as the Titanic is going down. I mean, that just represents a
Yeah.
minuscule part of the amount of food that needs to be produced to feed in this country 300 and some odd million people, and how many 7 billion people on the planet. We need to look at it as in a much grander scope than that.
Yeah.
And so we need to address it on those terms. But anything that gets, makes people more aware of what's involved and what the costs are. And I'll tell you, quite often, uh, when I tell people, like, to grow an acre of onions, and this people don't understand this, but like to grow an acre of onions, just seed, chemicals, labor, and fertilizer. Not talking taxes, not talking equipment repair, not talking fuel, any of those kind of expenses, just seed, chemicals, fertilizer, and labor. Those four composed would basically cost about to grow 1 acre of onions from seed between $3,000 to $5,000 an acre. So by the time I harvested my 50 acre part of the farm, the three of us, my father and brother and I was looking at, if I was lucky, $150,000 in debt, of
Yeah.
expenses that I racked up over that season. And of course, you get wiped out, then you can't pay that back. People, when they hear that, it's amazing to see sometimes people's reaction, because it kind of hits home like, oh my God. Then they understand, like, oh, now I see why they're, when you get wiped out. And then, like, if there is assistance needed, let's provide the assistance that's needed on a realistic level.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you all being here. This was a great webinar, a great film, great opportunity to have a chat with you. I'm sorry to everybody who sent some questions over. We didn't get to all of them, but we will record this. I'll save the chat and send it to Chris and Jeff just so they can see everything that you all were thinking. And just a quick note, I dropped a link to where you can watch the film again on Hudsey TV if you're interested, or if you want to share that with others. It will not be included in our webinar recording, but you can sign up for a free account and watch it there anytime. One last note, I encourage everybody who's interested in farm support, farmer support, or a program like ours. You can just go to www.nyfarmnet.org and learn a little bit more about what we do to help farmers. But again, storytelling like this is one of the most impactful things that I think can be done. So I really appreciate it, Chris, Jeff. Thank you both so much for being here, and let's do it again.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. We
All right.
greatly appreciate it.
Thank you to all of our attendees. Take care, everybody.